The courtroom buzzed with quiet tension, as it usually did before a case. Lawyers shuffled papers, clerks double-checked dockets, and spectators murmured from the wooden benches. Judge Harold Kingston, a man in his late 60s, known for his stern demeanor and traditionalist views, sat atop the bench with the same bored detachment he wore every morning. As the back doors creaked open, a tall black man in a sharp, tailored navy blue suit stepped into the room. He moved with calm confidence, but not the kind that drew attention, rather the kind that carried weight, earned over years of discipline and quiet power. In his hand, a leather-bound portfolio. No robe, no security detail, no fanfare. He glanced around the courtroom as if surveying it for the first time, noting the architecture, the acoustics, the seating arrangement. His eyes briefly landed on Judge Kingston, then moved on. Kingston squinted at the man from his perch and leaned forward toward the microphone. "Sir, this is a court in session. If you're here to observe, find a seat in the gallery. And if you're late for a case, you'll need to speak to the bailiff, like everyone else." The man raised a brow but remained silent. He began making his way toward the bench, not to approach the judge directly, but toward a side door near the clerk's station. Kingston's voice boomed louder this time. "Excuse me. Sir, you cannot just walk wherever you want in my courtroom." "Bailiff, stop him!" The bailiff, caught off guard, stepped forward hesitantly. "Sir, can I help you?" Before the man could reply, a younger court clerk suddenly stood and rushed over, nearly stumbling over her own shoes. She whispered something to the bailiff, whose eyes immediately widened. He turned pale. The man finally spoke, his voice calm, refined, but with unmistakable authority. "It's all right. I'm expected. I was told to use this entrance." Judge Kingston frowned. "Expected? By whom?" The clerk, now visibly nervous, turned toward the judge. "Your Honor, that's Justice Emmanuel Rhodes, from the United States Supreme Court. He's here today to observe proceedings and speak at the judicial luncheon." A beat of silence fell over the room like a dropped gavel. Judge Kingston's face drained of color. His mouth opened slightly, then shut again. He removed his glasses slowly and sat back, stunned, as the courtroom filled with whispers and turned heads. Justice Rhodes gave a polite, professional nod. Not smug, not gloating, just dignified. Then, he disappeared through the side door, leaving behind only the echo of shocked silence and the image of a judge realizing he had just scolded the highest-ranking judicial authority in the country. Back in his chambers, Judge Kingston sat motionless at his desk. The polished wood beneath his elbows felt colder than usual. His gavel rested untouched, and his docket remained open to a page he hadn't read in 10 minutes. His mind was elsewhere, still playing back the moment. Justice Emmanuel Rhodes. The name now echoed with new weight, not just because of its title, but because of what it represented. Rhodes wasn't just a Supreme Court justice. He was one of the few black men to ever hold that position in the nation's history. A legal mind of formidable strength, known not only for his sharp constitutional reasoning, but for his quiet commitment to justice reform. Kingston had read his decisions, admired them even, but never connected the name to the man who had walked, unassumingly, into his courtroom. The realization stung deeper because of how reflexive his response had been, how quickly he had defaulted to correction, command, control. A knock at the door pulled him from thought. His clerk peeked in. "Your Honor, he's ready to see you now." Kingston stood, smoothed his robe, and walked down the hallway with heavy steps. The air in the judicial conference room felt different, tense, expectant. As he entered, he spotted Rhodes seated at the long table, reading a printed summary of current state cases, a cup of coffee in hand. "Justice Rhodes," Kingston said cautiously, "I wanted to—" Rhodes looked up and gave a respectful nod. "Judge Kingston." There was no hint of malice in his tone, no smugness, just calm professionalism. "I believe we started off on the wrong foot," Kingston began. "I didn't recognize you?" "That much was clear," Rhodes replied, setting the papers aside. "But that's not the issue." Kingston stiffened. "Then what is?" Rhodes gestured for him to sit. The issue isn't that you didn't recognize me. It's that you didn't stop to ask. You saw a black man walking through your courtroom and assumed he didn't belong. Kingston opened his mouth but paused. Rhodes continued. You're not the first. Won't be the last. I've had doors closed on me in law schools I taught at. Been asked to leave chambers I was due to preside over. But today, in your courtroom, in front of your staff, you reinforced something dangerous. He leaned in slightly. That authority only belongs to those who look the part. And when someone doesn't, they're treated like a threat or a mistake. Kingston swallowed hard. The rebuke was gentle but firm, like a surgeon wielding a scalpel, not a hammer. I understand, he said finally. I hope you do, Rhodes said, because the people watching you, interns, clerks, even bailiffs, will remember how you act more than what you rule. There was no further lecture. No need for it. Rhodes picked up his coffee and went back to reading, as if the matter was settled. Judge Kingston sat back in his chair, feeling the unfamiliar weight of humility settle on his shoulders, and realizing that maybe this was the most important lesson he'd learned in years. The judicial luncheon was already in full swing by the time Justice Rhodes stepped into the hall. Tables were filled with judges, clerks, legal scholars, and visiting attorneys. Polished silverware glinted beneath the warm lighting, and low murmurs of legal chatter floated through the air. But as soon as Rhodes entered, the atmosphere shifted. People noticed. Some stood politely. Others nudged each other, whispering his name with recognition and quiet awe. He wasn't just a Supreme Court justice. He was a symbol. A man who had spent decades carving his way through a system that wasn't built with him in mind. A man whose very presence disrupted assumptions. He walked slowly through the crowd, nodding to familiar faces, shaking hands with those who offered them. At a table near the front, Judge Kingston stood as Rhodes approached. There was a long, loaded silence. Then, with visible effort, Judge Kingston pulled out the chair beside him. Would you join me, Justice Rhodes? Rhodes gave him a level look, measuring whether the gesture was genuine. Then quietly he nodded. Thank you, Judge. The two men sat side by side, and conversation at nearby tables stilled. Not out of rudeness, but reverence. People sensed the weight of what was happening. Over lunch, Kingston asked questions. Real ones. Not pleasantries, not political probes, but questions about policy, precedent, and reform. Rhodes answered thoughtfully, as always, but also with honesty that cut deeper than usual. At one point, Kingston asked, Do you ever feel like people still underestimate you? Rhodes smiled faintly. Only when they're brave enough to show it. The moment held. Kingston nodded slowly, understanding far more than he had that morning. A young law student at a nearby table leaned over, nervously interrupting. Justice Rhodes? I just wanted to say, your opinion in the Baldwin versus Whitaker case, it changed the way I think about the law. Rhodes turned and offered a warm, genuine smile. That's why we write them. The student lit up, grateful. As the luncheon went on, Rhodes didn't try to command the room. He didn't need to. His presence was enough. But those who listened, truly listened, heard more than legal wisdom. They heard lived experience shaped into discipline. They heard a man who had been mistaken, dismissed, challenged, and still chose to lead with clarity instead of bitterness. By the end of the event, even Kingston looked different. His posture had softened. His eyes had changed. Not out of shame, but growth. It was clear that this lunch wasn't just a formality. It was a turning point. For both men. And for everyone watching. The next morning, the courthouse felt different. Word had spread. Clerks whispered in the halls. Interns typed quieter than usual. Even the security guards, normally casual and chatty, stood straighter at their posts. It wasn't just the visit from a Supreme Court justice that had created a ripple through the building. It was what the visit revealed. Justice Emmanuel Rhodes wasn't just a name in a headline anymore. He was real, and the way he had been treated by Judge Kingston had not gone unnoticed. Back in Judge Kingston's chambers, the atmosphere was quiet, reflective. He sat alone, staring at the framed photo on his desk. an old picture of him fresh out of law school, surrounded by fellow graduates, all white men in dark suits. He had never noticed the uniformity of it before, but now it looked different. A knock broke the silence. His senior clerk stepped in. "Your Honor, the first case of the day is ready. But also, there's been a request." "Request?" "Yes, from the State Bar Association. They'd like you to host a judicial discussion next week." With Justice Rhodes Kingston's brows rose slightly. "Me?" "Yes. They said he requested it personally." The judge leaned back, absorbing that. He nodded. "Tell them yes." As the clerk left, Kingston took a deep breath and stood. He put on his robe with care, almost ritualistically this time. He straightened his shoulders and walked out into the courtroom, not with the indifference of habit, but with the awareness of responsibility. In the gallery, he noticed a few young black students seated in the back, quietly observing. One of them held a notebook and wrote something as he entered. Kingston paused for just a moment. He walked to the bench, adjusted his seat, and scanned the room. Then he did something small, but noticeable. He acknowledged the students with a nod. Respectful, intentional. It wasn't grand, it wasn't performative, but it meant something. After the session began, the law student who'd been taking notes turned to her classmate beside her. "That nod?" she whispered. "That's new." Her friend smiled. "I think someone learned something yesterday." By the end of the week, the judicial community was buzzing with commentary about the courthouse incident. News hadn't gone public, not in a tabloid sense, but legal circles talk. Judges talk, law schools talk. And so do young attorneys, who had always wondered if the halls of justice had space for them. Justice Rhodes, meanwhile, had returned to Washington but left behind more than impressions. He had sparked conversation, quiet but meaningful, about perception, race, and presence in a system built generations ago for a different kind of courtroom. But for Judge Kingston, the impact was more personal. He'd begun to look at everything differently, his rulings, his assumptions, even the artwork on the courthouse walls. In the hallway near his chambers hung a long-standing portrait gallery of past judges. They were all dignified. They were all white. They all looked like him. He stood there one afternoon alone, staring at the line of faces. Something about it suddenly felt hollow. Back in his office, he called his clerk. "Would you reach out to the historical committee?" he asked. "Ask them what it would take to update the gallery. We've had diverse judges in this state. They deserve to be remembered, too." His clerk was surprised but pleased. "Absolutely, Your Honor." The judge nodded. "And have we gotten final confirmation on the judicial panel with Justice Rhodes?" "Yes. It's on for Thursday. The law school auditorium. Full house already." Kingston smiled faintly. "Good. Let's give them something worth remembering." On the day of the event, the auditorium buzzed. Students packed the seats. Professors leaned forward with legal pads in hand. Even some local news outlets had shown up, sensing the weight of the moment. When Judge Kingston walked onto the stage beside Justice Rhodes, the applause was immediate. And this time, he didn't feel like a man trying to make up for a mistake. He felt like a man trying to be better. He opened the event with humility. "I've served on the bench for over 20 years, he began. "And still, I was reminded this week that respect, fairness, and dignity are not just legal principles. They're human ones, and they start before the robe ever goes on." Justice Rhodes nodded beside him, saying nothing yet. Kingston continued, "It is an honor to share the stage with a man who has helped shape the law, not just through decisions, but through example." The applause came again, louder this time. When Rhodes finally spoke, his words were as measured as ever, calm, clear, and cutting through the noise. "The law isn't just about what's written in the books," he said. "It's about who we see when we look across the courtroom, and who we choose to listen to." After the panel concluded, students and legal professionals flooded the stage, eager to meet both men. But it was Justice Rhodes who drew the largest crowd. Young law students especially, many of them from underrepresented backgrounds, waiting for a chance to speak to someone who had walked a path they were just beginning. He shook every hand. He answered every question with patience, offering not just legal wisdom, but personal encouragement. Meanwhile, Judge Kingston lingered near the edge of the stage. He watched quietly, reflecting on the distance between who he had been just days ago and who he was trying to become now. Eventually, one of the young students broke away from Rhodes and approached Kingston. "Judge Kingston," the student said carefully, "I just wanted to say thank you for what you said tonight." The judge looked at her, a young black woman, maybe 22, eyes full of cautious hope. "I didn't expect to hear someone like you say those things," she added softly. Kingston's face softened. "Neither did I, but I meant them." She nodded, then glanced back toward Rhodes. "He's the reason I applied to law school." Kingston smiled. "He's the reason I've been doing a lot of thinking lately." As the crowd began to thin, Rhodes made his way toward Kingston. The two men stood together, surrounded by the soft echoes of students laughing, debating, dreaming out loud. Rhodes spoke first. "You handled that panel well. Honest. Direct. I needed to be," Kingston replied. "I owed that much." Rhodes tilted his head. "You don't owe me anything." "I wasn't just talking about you," Kingston said. "I owe it to this generation, to the bench, to the idea of justice actually meaning something." Rhodes nodded slowly, approvingly. Then, after a brief pause, he said, "You're not the first judge to get it wrong, you know." Kingston looked up. "No? No," Rhodes said, a faint grin forming. "You're just one of the few who admitted it." The two men shared a quiet, genuine moment. Before they parted, Kingston said, "If you're ever back in this district, my courtroom's open to you. No more assumptions." Rhodes smiled. "I'll hold you to that." Then he turned to leave, briefcase in hand, walking with the same calm strength he always carried, but now, leaving behind not just respect, but change. Months had passed since the now legendary courtroom moment between Judge Kingston and Justice Rhodes, but the ripple effects had only grown stronger. At law schools across the state, Rhodes's visit had become a pivotal case study, not because of legal theory, but because of the power of presence, perception, and humility. Judge Kingston had embraced the lessons, not as a form of penance, but as a foundation for real reform. His chambers began hosting monthly mentorship lunches for underrepresented law students. He worked with court administrators to revise judicial training programs, emphasizing bias awareness, cultural competency, and respectful courtroom conduct. But the most visible change was in his courtroom. He now paused before every session, scanning the room, not for who he expected to see, but for who was actually there. Every person, every story, every life had value, and it was his duty to make space for all of them. One quiet Tuesday morning, Judge Kingston took the bench as usual. A case was called, routine on the docket, but in the gallery, seated in the back, was Justice Rhodes. He hadn't announced he was coming. No entourage, no formal visit. Just a man watching a fellow judge work. Their eyes met briefly. Kingston gave a subtle nod. This time, Rhodes nodded back, with a quiet expression of approval. The case proceeded without drama. No outbursts, no assumptions. Just the steady rhythm of justice being carried out by someone who had learned, changed, and grown. After the session, Rhodes slipped out without a word. But on Kingston's desk later that day was a small envelope. Inside was a handwritten note. "True justice begins, not when we get it right the first time, but when we admit we got it wrong and choose better. Keep choosing better." Double quote. Judge Kingston folded the note carefully and placed it in his desk drawer. Not to hide it, but to keep it close. A reminder, a standard. Outside, the courthouse carried on as it always had, but something inside its walls had shifted. Justice, finally, was starting to look like everyone.